Traditionally, we're concerned about the impact that livestock have on riparian systems. And of course, the Cows and Fish program has really raised tools and profile and understanding about this. But it's not just domestic livestock that can cause riparian problems. Over on the right, there's a stretch of the Lamar River in Yellowstone Park where bison and elk grazing is producing some of the similar effects on the riparian system. Fourth principle, of course, provide effective rest after grazing. There's the famous old Alex Johnson photo there, showing the impact of intensity and frequency of clipping. And of course, for our herbaceous plants, we can often provide enough rest within a season or two to maintain the health and the vigor of those plants. Over on the left, we have some young cottonwood seedlings established on a point bar. We may need multiple years of rest to allow those cottonwood seedlings to establish, to become seedlings and saplings and reach a grazing resistant stage. So we'll have to use our tools to figure out how we're going to do that. My favorite, I think from throughout my career, my favorite so-called grazing system is the simple deferred rotation. And that's simply using a kind of a different sequence of use of pasture units as you go through from year to year. Sometimes poison or water availability will constrain that. But in this example, you can see that the fields are grazed, the red numbers are grazed in the sequence of 1, 2, 3 in the first year, and in the blue numbers they're shifted to 1, 2, 3 in the second year. The field grazed last this year is grazed first next year. And so we can see all four principles of range management being applied in this simple deferred rotation. We set stocking rates that manage grazing intensity. When we have early grazing in a field, we don't do it in every year. That early grazing period alternates through the years. The bunching of cattle with cross fencing improves animal distribution, and then we have rest periods applied. And it's as simple as that, but a very powerful tool. And of course, putting the principles into practice, every farm and ranch is unique, and so there's a long list of practices that we can reach to implement the principles of range management. So when our staff, and there's a number of them here in the room, when they are out doing a renewal inspection or maybe working on a problem case, very often they start by going through these four principles kind of as their checklist, looking to see what's in balance, what's out of balance. I would, just as a learning challenge for you, if you would like to learn more about the principles of range management, here's 4 documents you can find online. Our Grazing Lease Code of Practice you can find on the ESRD website, Caring for the Green Zone on the Cows and Fish website, and then At Home on the Range on the Multisar website. Each one of them profiles those principles and applies them in a slightly different way depending on the focus of the document, of the tool. I'll move on to talk about range health. In Alberta, I think our first range condition guide was produced about 1966. And by the time the 90s rolled around, we were challenged to update our science. If we looked south of the border, there was the U.S. science community was very much focused on this new concept of range health. And basically what it involves is looking at rangelands from a kind of a different prism. Instead of looking at them primarily as a forage source, there was a recognition that these are complex ecosystems with a variety of different benefits and functions and processes that we need to be aware of. And we can't measure them with one indicator. Historically, that was species composition. So what we actually saw with our U.S. colleagues was the development of actually quite a complex list of about 17 indicators that they developed in their range health system. We looked at that, and we felt that we didn't have the kind of infrastructure that they have in terms of personnel to apply something as technical as this 17 indicator system. So we worked with it. We went through kind of a Delphi process with specialists and academics, and we came up with our system of rangeland health assessment that relies primarily on 5 indicators. We add a couple of couple of others for special cases, but primarily focusing on 5 indicators. We have a protocol developed in our little red book for native grasslands, forested rangelands, and for tame seeded pastures. We're fortunate in Alberta to have studies like the one that was done at Staveley that shows us kind of the polar ends of stewardship, from healthy, well-managed range right through to something that has been deliberately degraded. We can understand through the research that was done there the kinds of changes that happen to vegetation and soil, and to kind of see how our indicators line up along that spectrum. And for any of you that maybe are not familiar with Staveley, the light stalking rate, light to moderate stalking rate that maintain composition over on the right and maintain our black Trinizemic soil. And over on the far left, the very heavily grazed field for 45 or more years that has actually resulted in the loss of the native rough fescue plant community, replaced largely by a weedy plant community, and also a degradation of the soil profile, loss of soil organic matter. And of course, we again come back to the ecological services that we benefit from rangelands, and which require the maintenance of health and function. So our system of range health assessment indicators, there's the 5 indicators over there on the left. Integrity and ecological status, we're basically asking what the plant community is, plant community structure, hydrologic function and nutrient cycling, site stability, and noxious weeds. So we're not measuring these things in a direct way. We're using sort of indirect practical measures to kind of get at them. Our little sort of Delphi design process also came up with ranking these indicators slightly differently for each different situation. For native forest or tame pasture, we put different emphasis on different indicators depending on the system. Now, I'll just touch on it here. Craig will talk about it in much more detail, but so we need 2 things. We need a set of indicators, and we need standards. The plant community guides, which are the result of really of decades of work, capture the information about the ecological sites that are under evaluation, and that they provide our reference. So if we look at a plant community description, we can see that we need this information to answer our 5 questions, and this kind of illustrates where we draw from in those descriptions. And I'll just very quickly just run through just to give you a visual indication. Here's our Staveley site, and this first question: what is the plant community? We're asking, what do we have today relative to essentially what the site wants to be, what the reference plant community is. And the reference plant community is in the grasslands is a plant community expressing its potential under light grazing. And you can see the rough fescue Perry's oatgrass in the upper left. As we add some grazing pressure, maybe go from light to moderate, in the upper right, you can see we've changed plant species composition a little bit. We've switched abundance. We basically still have a very similar plant community, but now Perry's oatgrass is dominant. In the lower left now, we have some major changes taking place as we go to heavy grazing. We're now shifting to very much an increaser-dominated plant community. And in the lower right, now we have a community that's really dominated by increasers and weedy species. Okay, so you can see the ecological status score is, so this can be quantified, but it's also very visual. So that's the first question. Healthy with problems, and unhealthy. Plant community structure, very important tool or indicator in the tool. Structure is important in rangeland plant communities because it maximizes energy and nutrient capture, biodiversity, habitat values, and forage diversity. And again, something that can be very visually assessed. You can see on the left the forest understory with various understory trees, tall shrubs, medium shrubs, tall grasses, and forbs. And over on the right, you can see a number of those structural layers have been reduced. We can, it's a little harder to do in a grassland, but we can see similar structural layers in that situation as well. Third indicator looks at moisture retention and nutrient cycling. Going back to Dr. Wilm's research again, we actually, because we monitor litter at our reference areas, we've been actually able to develop reference tables to predict how much litter we expect to find on an ecological site. And we use this highly technical approach involving the human hand to rake litter and visually estimate how much there is in a quarter-meter frame. We can take that to the lab and weigh it there in grams as well if we're not happy with the hand measurement. But it's a system that's worked quite well. In the forest setting, we look at the LFH layer, the degree to which that layer is normal or compressed or maybe even absent, and we'll often do a site investigation looking at areas of different traffic on the site to come up with that estimate. The fourth question deals with site stability. Most of our rangelands, forested rangelands and grassland rangelands, are naturally quite stable. When we get down into the southeastern grasslands where we have a lot of solonetzic soils, answering this question becomes a little more difficult because many sites naturally have an abundance of bare soil. So those four ecological range sites are all healthy, but they all have very different amounts of natural bare soil. So it's a two-part question. Is there evidence of accelerated erosion, and is there an increase in human-caused bare soil? And then the fifth question looks at noxious weeds, and we use a density distribution, coding, and cover estimate to come up with an estimate of weeds. And so Donna put these together a few years ago. We roll that up into a health score in three categories: less than 50 unhealthy, 50 to 74 healthy with problems, and 75 to 100 is healthy. Now, this still, to some people, there's an example from grasslands, some will say, well, this is a value-laden scale. We can uncouple those health categories, and if your goal is managing patch diversity in a landscape for a variety of different bird species, you could deliberately manage for different health classes, and we have examples of that kind of work ongoing. There's an example from tame pastures as well. So that's a very quick process. Our staff, I would say that normally it takes a number of years for an agrologist to develop a comfort level with range health and to get to know their ecological sites in the area that they're working. We see range health working at three levels: for the rancher and for some of the training that we do with producers. This basic awareness, we call it eye tuning. That ranchers can be very effective at this sort of recognition of the health level in a very subjective way. Our staff tend to use it in the, right there's Terry out doing some range health assessment, Terry. Out doing a rapid assessment out in the dry mixed grass. We can also couple the range health assessment with what we call the MF5, or the long form, where we collect detailed plant cover information and then do our health assessment on the heels of that. And that's often used in research designs as well. And a lot of the reclamation work that we were talking about last year, the recovery strategies, we've tied these things together there as well. I won't go into the riparian health. If you look at the riparian health assessment, you'll see that our style of asking questions is very similar. And in fact, we were involved in developing those tools, and we actually took that approach and adapted it to the range health world. A little bit about grazing leases. Of course, going back, the stewardship ethic and practices of leaseholders leads to sustainable grazing practices. And of course, today, we value these rangeland ecosystems for the health and function and the ecological services that they provide. And again, the code of practice guides that. Just to show, kind of encapsulates what our staff do and this grazing lease management process. If we look at, say, the life of a typical grazing lease, it would run 10 years. During the first 8 years of the life of that grazing lease, our agrologists would be involved in monitoring of stewardship and compliance issues. They might respond to public complaints. Might be involved in implementing some land use decisions. They might address resource integration needs and issues. And then, as they get towards that renewal date, their audit processes have to kick into gear, where they do range and riparian health assessments. The information that they capture there is a proactive report card back to the leaseholder, where they review the audit results, define management objectives where required, and then sometimes that may take them down a compliance track as well. But very often it's a learning experience, it's a positive feedback loop leading to the renewal of that grazing lease for another 10-year term. And it's through that the practices of the producer and the coaching and monitoring work that our staff do that our grazing, a lot of our grazing land is maintained in health and function. We have another process that also works in the Rocky Mountain Forest Reserve. There's another form of legislation that guides that, and some very robust tools that are applied in that landscape as well. So I'll just wrap up here. Some of the places that, I'm assuming that all of these are going to be posted, our presentations will be posted. And so just some places I'd like to recommend to you to go and look for the tools and other tools that relate to rangeland management. Of course, our ESRD website, and the list of major themes that you'll find there include the items on the right: stewardship code of practice, grazing, timber integration, range health, all the plant community guides that are published, range stewardship and riparian areas. So that's my first recommendation to you. The second thing I would recommend to those that would like to grow their knowledge and skills in range management is the Society for Range Management. And for those of us that are involved with AIA, we actually need to be very involved with both organizations. The Society for Range Management puts on a gangbusters annual meeting, conference, technical sessions for a 3 or 4 day period, technical tours, a really outstanding experience. As well as within the region, there's usually summer field tours put on by the International Mountain Section, so highly recommend these. The SRM. We work with Stewardship Partners, so some of the tools that you'll find there we've helped to create as well. I wish that I had a little royalty for the one on the left there. I think there's 80,000 copies of that in circulation now since we first published that. And more recently, the recovery strategies published with the Foothills Restoration Forum on the right. In terms of extension and outreach, the kind of model that we normally try to deliver is the teaching of principles and practices, range plant ID, and then range and riparian health assessment. And that sort of runs through just about any sort of delivery mechanism that we... And here's some examples: the spring training that my team do with our agrologists, with our field agrologists. Range health field days that we do, and that includes the training we've done with the Foothills Restoration Forum in recent years. The Stockman's Range Management course. That course hasn't run formally since 2004, but we're talking about perhaps a revival of that starting this year. The Grazing School for Women, which has been going, I think, for over 10 years. Society for Range Management summer tours, and there, of course, Cows and Fish Extension. I think a really exciting new resource in Alberta is the Rangeland Research Institute. The chair of the institute is Dr. Edward Bork, and the institute has been received an endowment from a family in Calgary of a ranch at Duchess, along with some financial resources, and the teaching program and research program at the U of A has expanded. So highly recommend this as another site to check out. So.